Okay, ka kamata tātou. It's 1 minute past 4, and in New Zealand, and 5 o'clock in Rarotonga. So for those of you from the sitting in the Cook Islands, thank you so much for joining us today, knowing that this is after hours, and I'm sure you'll be keen to get home and join your families at home. We're going to speak in English today, if that's okay with everyone. And I think we'll just kick off. We have speakers that we will introduce as we go through each one of them. And may I just acknowledge also Sir Colin joining us today, and all our participants outside the Cook Islands as well. Kia ora tātou katoa. Okay, so I'm just going to introduce a bit around health research before we introduce our 4 keynote speakers today. So just giving you a brief overview of research in the Cook Islands. Many of us wouldn't have been born at the time this started. Next slide, Lucy. And if we think back to the times before, in pre-1900s, we already had medicines that we were using, the Vairanga Māori, and we had our taunga who were the main health practitioners and healers in the Cook Islands. We know about this. They used noni that we still use now, noni, miro, the au from the hibiscus, and other medicines that and other plants that we know about. And knowledge was passed through families, through community rituals, as you know, really through oral history. But I know some of this has been captured in some recent publications, but not enough. The other thing is that even though in the 1820s, when missionaries started traveling into the Pacific and the Cook Islands, we did see the introduction of Western medicines, but traditional medicines still held. And remember, this time was also when influenza was introduced in the 1900s, measles, sexually transmitted infections. Next. And we developed medicines to that. And then up until the end of World War II, we saw the introduction of New Zealand government systems or health systems being introduced in the country. And some of you might recall seeing leprosy, tuberculosis. This is the sanatorium that was built up on the hill, which is our current Rarotonga Hospital. And at that time, people thought that, you know, fresh air would be important to control tuberculosis. And of course, that was when vaccination and community education programs kicked off. And in the 1940s, we saw a huge reduction in the incidence of tuberculosis. But traditional medicines were continuing to be practiced in the Cook Islands. We called it maki tupapaku, some of us. This tupapaku is like ghost or spiritual spirits. And I recall seeing some of this during my time, and the use of herbal, poultices and other things that we could drink. Next slide. Following 1945, we saw research moving into action at a wider scale, on a broader scale, and the eradication of TB in the Cook Islands. And this is when this is in collaboration with New Zealand. There were a lot of x-rays done. The BCG vaccination was important, and of course, drugs that were used to treat tuberculosis. There were other diseases that were found at the time and were being researched, iodine deficiency, filariasis with lymphatic filariasis, and of course, traditional medicine was also used at the time to help us alleviate some of this. It's unclear whether the traditional medicines helped, but what we're seeing now in today's time and research that's happening, Natalie is one of the people that's studying this, where we're looking at traditional medicines and its role, not only in cancer, but also in COVID treatment. So one of the other things too that's been important around research was cardiovascular disease studies. This is with Dr. Ian Pryor back in the 1960s. Those publications are really important to demonstrate how the introduction of Western diets we don't talk about Western diets anymore. It's like it's just ubiquitous and everywhere. But that was really one of the core, the causes back in the day, reduced physical activity as well as urbanization. And some of us might recall the migrant studies, not just in the Cook Islands, but also Tokelau. And with the filariasis surveys, this is important because it goes into the time when Dr. Joe Williams was involved in the elimination of lymphatic filariasis in the Cook Islands, and WHO recognized that. I had forgotten, I think it was in the 1980s. Next slide. Then pushing on into the 25 years ago, diabetes, obesity became priorities for research. We had the Liggins Institute with the Pacific Science for Health Literacy Project, which is still running, by the way, and the Development Origins research component. And some of this is being piloted in some of the smaller islands of the Cook Islands, I think Mangaia, Aitutaki, and Atu. It also coincided with a time for ethics reforms when, and at this time, there was support from the Health Research Council of New Zealand with Dr. Kiki Mawate, who was at the time chair of the Pacific Health Research Committee, and the establishment of our research committee, which still exists today. Next slide. And from the 2020s, some of us will recall Dr. Sam Manuela with his mental health survey work. This was quite important in terms of describing the prevalence of anxiety, depression, and using the Te Vai framework, which is familiar to Cook Islanders in terms of how we can weave solutions to addressing these in the Cook Islands and among our youth. Then, of course, the lymphatic filariasis elimination. In 2018, WHO conducted a survey, and that's when there were no chronic cases found. I recall seeing many of our older folk at the time having, big legs because of the lymphatic filariasis. And then there was work around the research ethics, and this is where Polly has been involved in this for some time now, and other colleagues as well. And this was really important in terms of putting together the guiding principles. And Polly might refer to this later on in the conversation. The Puna Vai Mārama is the Cook Islands Centre for Research that collaborates with the University of the South Pacific in the Cook Islands. And Emma is the new director from earlier this year, and she will be speaking to us shortly. And finally, let's see, last slide. I just wanted to talk about the Cook Islands Annual Health Conference, which in 2019 was in its 24th, 25th year of running. And this was started by Dr. Kiki Mawate. And over the time, research was a key focus for these health conferences. And it really built a workforce, not in the Cooks only, but also outside the Cook Islands, not only Cook Islanders as well, but Pacific Islanders as well. And every year when this conference was held, it attracted a lot of researchers from New Zealand, and it was a fantastic time to sort of see the growth of researchers across the Pacific. And in 2023, some of us may have attended the Cook Islands Health Conference, which was held in collaboration with the PMA, and one of the biggest participants that attended, and the array of research projects that were shared during that time was just fantastic. And we look forward to more of these. And in the annual health conferences, they've continued to run 2024 and this year as well. And what we've seen is a growth of Cook Islands-based researchers presenting, and that's just fantastic. And so the theme this year was around the first 1,000 days, but as you will know, these themes are just expanding, and we're just seeing some real growth, not only in the Cook Islands, but also the Cook Islands research in New Zealand as well. So really want to say thank you to all those that have been part of this story. And so today, that's just my final slide, Lisi. It's really hearing from some of our key our speakers today on where the Cook Islands has sort of situated itself and potential for forward thinking around research. So that's just me. And if I may, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Emma Powell. As I've mentioned, she's the director of Te Puna Vai Mārama, the Cook Islands Research Association in the Cooks, which was founded by, if I may remember, the Crocums, Ron Crocum and Marjorie Crocum, many years ago. And it's lovely to have you, Emma. She holds a lot of other roles, but I thought I'd just introduce her as a daughter of Atu and Mangaia. Kia ora, Emma, over to you.
Me taki Aumea kia ora ana tātou. I did test this just before, so just bear with me while I share my screen. Can we see this, everybody? Just a thumbs up. Yes, great. Well, kia ora ana, and thank you for the invite today. We did decide we were going to be short and sweet with our introduction. So tōku ingoa ko Emma. I see many colleagues in the room today. I am the director of Te Puna Vai Mārama, the Cook Islands Centre for Research. And I do often say I'm a daughter of Ātiu and Mangaia first. Usually I'm resident in Rarotonga as I support the work of the Research Centre, but today I am beaming to you from Dunedin. So forgive me if I'm a bit rugged up, it's a bit cold here. So I've been in Dunedin where I've been busy giving a keynote at the Otago Global Health Institute conference this morning. I want to just acknowledge Dr. Aumea's opening words and start by saying that my contribution to our session today is really a beginning to the broader series of webinars that we'll look forward to as the Cook Islands research community. So my session or my contribution to our discussions today are not so much a comprehensive background on qualitative methods or Indigenous research methodologies as may have been hinted at in our advertising, but more of a refresher and maybe a bit of ground preparation for the sessions that will come later in this webinar series. So today they're more reminders, I suppose. My reminders today will cover sort of why we do research, this thing called qualitative research, broadly speaking, and Indigenous research methodologies, at least as far as I know them in the Cook Islands context. And finally, I just want to maybe extend what Aumea has shared about the Cook Islands knowledge sector in other parts other than health that I might add on to what Aumea has just shared with us all. So I thought I'd just start with a little bit about my research and sort of maybe lead us then into why we do research and some of the questions that we can ask. So I trained in public policy and literary studies at Victoria University of Wellington in New Zealand. And I went on to postgraduate study at the University of Auckland in an MA program there with poet and literary scholar, now Professor Selena Tusitala-Marsh. I completed my MA thesis on the Anglophone writing tradition, so the writing in English of our people. And I focused much of my work on, just switch slides here, sorry, everybody. And so I focused most of my work on the published poetry of Jean Mason, Vaini Witchman, Ben Rasmussen, the late and legendary Kauraka of Manahiki, and Makiuti Tongia is what I did a lot of my research on then. In that research, I made some strong statements about the contributions that I felt Cook Islanders had made during the cultural renaissance of the post-colonial period, particularly through our literary contributions in the work of those like Mama Johnny Frisbee, Mama Margie, Papa Ron, who is such a key part of establishing USP in Fiji. Other writers, like the poets I mentioned, and scholars like Papa John Jonathan and countless others, made contributions not just to the Cook Islands nation and our people, but to the broader regionalism that was built in the post-war period and onward. So after working in the public sector for a while and travelling throughout the world, I went back to Vic in Wellington to complete a PhD in 2019. And my PhD was a research project that looked at the genealogical practices of our people, or what we know as a kapapaanga. And I spent 3 years thinking about why our relations mean so much to us. I wanted to understand why relationships are so powerful to our society, and I wanted to be able to describe what I felt was a cornerstone of our society. So ultimately, the Cook Islands has always been at the heart of my research work. I have committed most of my career to this thing called research, and it has been driven by curiosity and my hunger for answers. All of us in some way are curious about the things that happen in our everyday lives. So just to sort of start us off with why we do this thing called research, and why it's might be interesting for us to think about purpose, is that it's one of the ways that we can ask the important questions that maybe trouble us or irritate us sometimes. So you might ask, why do I need to pay this much for this? Or what is in my sandwich and where do the ingredients come from? Where does the algae in the lagoon come from? Why do things cost so much in the supermarket? All of these sorts of questions start us off in research. I've always been curious. For me in research, I've always been curious about my own personal history, so my own papaanga. And when I have been unable to find satisfactory answers from parents, elders, teachers, I have gone to look for the answers to my questions in other places. So research is an important part of how we as individuals and how we as a society make decisions, and particularly good decisions. When we do research, we gather and discern evidence that tells us whether a decision we make will be useful or not. It tells us what kind of decisions we should make, or whether perhaps we should make decisions at all. So simply put, research is the process of discovering new knowledge. This knowledge can be either the development of new concepts or the advancement of existing knowledge and theories, leading to a new understanding that was not previously known. There are lots of ways to approach research or inquiry in academic research. Scholars often separate research approaches into two different categories, the qualitative and the quantitative. These two approaches have their roots in different ideological foundations. I know for some of you this will all be very familiar, but for the sake of sort of starting this series, I thought I would give this sort of basic representation of the difference, but also the relationship between the two. So qualitative research, for example, focuses on the human experience, the subjective, and the importance of context, time, place, culture, class, gender, for understanding social phenomena. Many think of qualitative research as opposite to quantitative research, which focuses on numerical, objective forms of research to test hypotheses. But in fact, these are both quite complementary. This Venn diagram is a bit misleading, I think, because often research is not quite this even-handed, and the part in the middle is actually quite complex. Forms of qualitative research include methods like the interview, ethnography, and observation, and researchers use these to discover what gives humans meaning, how things are socially and or culturally constructed, and how we can explain social phenomena and human behavior through experience and reflection. Many who work with qualitative approaches work in the social sciences. So that includes things like psychology, anthropology, etc. And sometimes, but not always, in the humanities, which includes disciplines like history, philosophy, literature, and cultural studies. And I know that many of our colleagues here today work in health and public health. And these methods are often used across public health research as well. In policy work, social science and science research is often used to drive policy development, depending on the issues at hand. For some sectors like health and public health, research pulls on a range of research approaches and traditions to answer key questions. So, for example, public health researchers may gather and analyse a significant amount of health data, but also undertake focus groups with populations of interest to a particular project to understand the nuance of behaviour, for example, within a particular demographic or cohort. Researchers call this interdisciplinary research because these approaches are made up of methods from both qualitative and quantitative traditions, employing a specific set of theories and methods that may come from different schools of thought in order to answer the question or questions being posed. And our colleague Andrew will talk a bit more about the quantitative side in a little bit. Research work, particularly in the Cook Islands and for Cook Islands society, is undertaken by many different individuals and organisations. Research can be complex and expensive, but it can also be rewarding for the insights it provides decision makers and for those who undertake research as a profession and may spend months or entire careers dedicated to answering some of the biggest questions facing our society. In the Cook Islands, there are many non-Cook Islanders who have done research on our nation and people and published about it. In the last 15 years, there has also been an increase of Cook Islands researchers who work in our knowledge sector and who are undertaking qualitative research methods that pay attention to Cook Islands specific critical lenses and methods that increase the accuracy and nuance of the qualitative research that is being produced about our nation and peoples, no matter where they are located. Where before it was mostly our researchers working and publishing about research in the Cook Islands, we are now seeing an increasing number of Cook Islanders working to create and critique knowledge production about ourselves. One of the ways that we do this work is by employing Indigenous approaches to research inquiry. Now I could talk about this for a long time, so I've made this as short and sweet as possible. But essentially, Indigenous research methodologies, broadly defined, are made up of methods, theoretical assumptions, and cultural and social frameworks that shape the way one asks questions and then how they are investigated. In the 1990s, following the post-colonial period of the 1960s and the cultural renaissance of the 1980s, Indigenous peoples increasingly began to enter tertiary education and undertake their own research within and beyond the university. And I just refer back to some of the early thinkers, the pioneering thinkers that I mentioned earlier, like the Crocums and others, who were part of this regional movement as well, of this cultural renaissance in the 1980s and onwards. In the early 1990s and into the 2000s, this led to Indigenous scholars innovating and thinking differently about the dominant approaches to research to that point, particularly the ideological underpinnings of the sciences that put emphasis on the preeminence of objectivity, as well as the tradition of studying Indigenous peoples as research subjects in disciplines like anthropology. Since the publications of texts like this one by Linda Tuhiwai-Smith, and some of you may be familiar with this book, is considered to be a seminal work on the importance of Indigenous-led research. Many more Indigenous research projects have been undertaken and new innovations have been developed, particularly in the Pacific. This issue, for example, from the Journal of the Polynesian Society, now called Wakakuaka, was co-edited by Marcia Lennon Young and Lisa Uparisa at the University of Auckland, where they explored Indigenous-led research and Indigenous methodologies in the Pacific in particular. I recommend reading the introduction to this issue if you are wanting an abridged history of Indigenous methodologies in the Pacific. In the Cook Islands, scholars, researchers, and writers have been producing new approaches to research and theorisation for a long time. Mama Tere Moana Hodges, who many of you will know, recently did an interview with us for a special issue in an academic journal on the Te Veve methodology, which has been a really significant contribution to the way Cook Islanders design their research, particularly collaborative work with Cook Islands communities. When we asked her in an interview recently about how and why she developed her work on the Te Veve, she said this. That's where I started thinking, then going into depth when I said about Konai, I didn't want to replicate what she did. That's Konai Helu Thaiman. I didn't want to replicate what others did. For me, the important thing was what was the thinking of Cook Islands women? What were they searching for to get to the point of saying Eureka? And then the other person I always think of as a key thinker is Papa Tom. And another quote that I often use to demonstrate the criticality of Indigenous Pacific approaches is this one, from Papa Tom, doctor, researcher, politician. When Papa Tom was asked why he was not using a traditional Cook Islands design in his building of an ocean-going waka, he responded with this quote: "If my ancestors had fiberglass, they would have used it," indicating both his willingness to think beyond assumed cultural authenticity in his work and to innovate new approaches to his practice as a thinker, as a researcher, and as a practitioner. And there are many, many other Cook Islanders now who have also begun to push the way we frame research to produce knowledge that is fit for purpose and research that properly serves our national and cultural context. And I'm very happy to give a list of authors and works to anyone who's interested from the seminar. Just email me. But those that I've already mentioned, Papa John, other recent scholars like Dr. Tina Newport, Dr. Troy Duhe, Val Witchman, whose recent development of kai wānanga has become very popular amongst researchers, and many other developments that are forthcoming from new doctoral students in the Cook Islands space, including Inanna Walter, Leon Kokaua, Katrina Charlotte, who is working on physical literacy. There is an incredible amount of documentation and description work that has been done by Ake Nicholas in the field of linguistics. And the list goes on, and I think there's plenty here for us as Cook Islanders to be proud of. Altogether, Pacific researchers and Cook Islanders are pushing new bounds of qualitative and quantitative research all the time. And I hope many of you will explore new avenues also. And there are some organisations, and I'll go through these last couple of slides quickly. There are some organisations and individuals that are doing this in what is, to me, a growing knowledge sector in and for the Cook Islands. So some of these were already mentioned by Aumea, but for those who want to undertake research in the Cook Islands, some of you will be familiar with this. There is a research ethics process that Polly will cover, I think, in a little bit, that's administered by the National Research Council that Aumea mentioned, and the Ethics Committee, which sits with the Office of the Prime Minister. And they are responsible for recording and assessing whether research can or should be undertaken in the Cook Islands, and if so, whether there are parameters that researchers are required to uphold in the best interests of the Cook Islands. The University of South Pacific, obviously, which is part owned by the Cook Islands government, is the primary university, along with CITTI as another one of the tertiary education providers in country. As a university, USB is also a central pillar for research work in the Cook Islands, attracting scholars and sometimes international students who are interested in the Cook Islands. Our organisation, obviously, Te Puna Vai Mārama, is also located at the USP campus and was established as an organisation that focuses specifically on producing research about, for, and by Cook Islanders. There are also other organisations in the private and NGO CSO sectors in the Cook Islands that produce knowledge and are engaged in research activities, which many of you will be familiar with. This is by far not an exhaustive list. So there's actually quite a lot of research that's being undertaken all the time. There are also many graduate and doctoral students that come to the Cook Islands every year, and increasingly so. And of course, many of us are in diaspora as well, working, studying, working on research projects. At Te Puna Vai Mārama, we host and have engagements with visiting scholars and students all the time. and from many different places. And many of you will also be hosting researchers within your own institutions and agencies as well, I'm sure. And Aumea mentioned some other ones that I haven't included here. So it's quite a large and sort of quite diverse knowledge sector and research sector, I think. So that's not an exhaustive list. I will leave it there. That was my quick run through of qualitative research and the Cook Islands sort of knowledge sector. I'll leave my presentation there, but thank you to those that have signed in today, the organisers, Professor Colin, Poutoko, colleagues at Te Marae Ora, and happy to take questions at a later time when people are ready. Thank you, Maitaki.
Me tiki mata, Emma. Thank you for that wonderful presentation and quite solid. And it's great that you highlighted some of our researchers, young, emerging, older. Just fantastic to get an overview of the researchers and Cook Islands research. And thank you for mentioning Sir Thomas Davis, Tom Davis. How could we forget? So now we're going to move on to our next speaker. And this lovely, I was going to say young lad, but this is one of our very good colleagues of the Cook Islands. He travels to the Cooks many times. He's actually the supervisor for Miss Aruna, one of our statistics students who's doing her master's, which is fantastic. So Andrew is from Ngāti Apa, Rangitane, and Te Rarawa, and he's a social epidemiologist and also the managing director for Insight Analytics. I'll hand it over to you now, Andrew. All yours.
Kia ora hua mai koutou. I'm going to share my screen and talk to you about quantitative research. Now, I have to be a little bit cautious because I've just spotted there's actually a couple of global experts on this course, and I'm a minion compared with some of the couple of the people in this audience. So what you're going to get is a very once over lightly description of what quantitative research is and why it's important. And in doing so, I want to highlight some of the opportunities and challenges. Right, so is that coming through? Yep, it says, okay, we're there. Good. Great. Okay. In quantitative research in the Cook Islands. Now, as you heard, I'm a social epidemiologist. That actually means I trained as a sociologist and accidentally became an epidemiologist. There's a couple of real epidemiologists on this call. I was one of the COVID modelers for Aotearoa. I was the person who did the equity work, and most of my work at the moment involves using ethnic statistics, both in New Zealand, the Pacific, and in Australia. Although, you know, once you get to my age, you also end up sitting on far too many committees. And I work in the AI space, in the data space, and in the data advocacy space. As a person of Ngāti Apa and Rangitane descent, that places me on my tupuna on the Kurahapa waka, which makes me a child, albeit a distant one, of Atu as well. So, so what is quantitative research? Now, quantitative research really is a way of doing research where you're gathering information in the form of numbers rather than words. Now, it involves collecting and analyzing and reporting data in the form of numbers. Now, that's important because it means that somebody else usually, or somebody's made a decision about what's worth measuring and how to measure it. And so when it was when Emma described before that means that you've got some embedded value judgments in quantitative research. That's why, because in order to measure something, you have to decide, well, is it worth measuring, and how do I measure it? And that there are quite often some value judgments involved with those. So when we do this, when we're collecting data, it usually means just measuring something or counting. You know, how big is something? How much did something cost? How many cases of whatever health condition walked through the hospital door? So sometimes the data is collected deliberately. So we go out there and actively collect it. And sometimes it's collected routinely. And a lot of what we call official statistics are based on routinely collected data. So it's data that, if you want a description, it's really kind of the digital exhaust of government. It's the stuff that gets produced just by government doing its thing, whether it's a health service doing its thing, or a tax department doing its thing, or a immigration service doing its thing. They're producing data all the time. So we're getting data that's actively collected and data that's routinely collected. When you're analyzing it, at the simplest level, it's just describing what's going on. It's like a digital picture. This is what it looks like. Or you might want to identify some patterns. This is what it looks like, but it's occurring in certain groups rather than others, or certain locations rather than others. Or you might do some more sort of in-depth analysis and start looking at actually what's causing this, right? Or if you get this a particular event, what does the data say is going to happen next? And we start to do some prediction. Now, when you're reporting on data, then on quantitative analysis, that's usually it's in the form of tables, graphs, or now even maps. We're beginning to see map-based information systems where you can click on a map and online and get more and more information about what's going in a particular locale. What's missing from this slide is data storage, right? And data storage is going to come up a bit later on, because that's one of the challenges we face about data storage and data sovereignty. So when we're talking about statistical analysis and quantitative research, it's usually in those stages there, right? But one of the things to really remember is that quantitative research is about standard processes and methods in every step and documenting them, what you did and why you did it. And the reason for doing that is people, you know how I said there's some embedded values here? This just means that people go, oh, that's why they did that, and that's what these numbers mean, right? Because numbers by themselves don't mean anything, right? We've given these numbers meaning, and that's why you need to describe what you did and why you did it. So what about quantitative data in the Cook Islands and for the Cook Islands? Now, one of the challenges of doing quantitative social research in the Cook Islands is there's not many people actually usually resident there. And so that proposes some challenges with regards to statistical analysis at kind of describing patterns or especially documenting change. But one of the good pieces of good news is there's now new techniques developing that can actually manage that. And so, and assist it and even automate it. So in terms of the good Cook Island data sources, now this is by no means an exhaustive list, it's just some examples. The key one, of course, is this Cook Island Statistical Office, right? Which has had the same director for a long time. There's lots of embodied knowledge there, and they not only collect data, but they get data from other agencies as well. Then you've got and that could be anything from economic data. They collect the migration data. They do the census. They even do the electoral roll. So that's the primary place to go to. But for health data, you go to Marae Ora. And in the last couple of years since COVID, you've seen a real uplift in the quality of the stats bulletins that are coming out of Marae Ora as they automate and improve and update some of the techniques and technology that they're using for that data. And then you've got the Cook Island Environmental Data Portal. So those are the three examples, but there's one of the big things is that the Cook Islands are sitting with Te Marae Ora, one of the largest global data sources for the marine environment. And I think that's really important on the global stage. And we're going to come back to that in a moment. The other data sources that are overseas are the Pacific Data Hub. Now that collates data from and about the Cook Islands, and it's based with the Pacific community, a really good resource. They have mainly sort of collected data, aggregated data. Statistics in New Zealand also has data on Cook Islands Māori population in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and those are good sources of aggregated data or count data, kind of pre-processed stuff. But if you really want detailed data about the Cook Island population in New Zealand, then there's the Stats New Zealand data integrated data infrastructure, which until about till last year was actually quite hard to analyze Cook Island specific data in there. But one of my team, a fantastic woman called Nicole Satherley, has developed a method which she's published, which enables us to robustly analyze Cook Island population data in New Zealand in this linked integrated data infrastructure. When we're talking about quantitative research, basically it's all about standardized processes, right? And as an occasional academic, one of the things we tell students not to do is copy. One of the things we teach people to do as quantitative survey researchers is copy, right? Copy lots, copy the methods, use existing questions, use existing methods for data collection that work. And the reason for doing that, is it makes our work comparable with others, right? But also we're using tools that we know work. If you're not using something, then ask for advice, right? And see what's been done before and borrow it. But whatever you do, keep it short and test it. If you're developing something yourself, test it to make sure it works. Similarly, with analyzing data, copy existing methods that have been used in similar projects, and otherwise ask for advice. Every project's different, every data set's different. You know, there are lots of experts out there you just tap them on the shoulder and they can go, well, actually, if you're dealing with that kind of data, do this kind of approach. Don't go it alone. Research is not a solo game, especially quantitative research. But primarily, take-home point is collecting data is really expensive. Really, really expensive. It's expensive for your time, but it's also expensive for the people providing it. So if possible, consider reusing existing data. Right? And that will it may not give you all the answers that you want or all the information that you want, but it will save you a lot of time. And don't let perfect get in the way of useful, right? It can still be useful, even if it's not perfect. In terms of some examples, here's something that we've done with Cook Island data. This is some data that we've just pulled from the Te Marae Ora bulletins over the years. And myself and a colleague, we went through the bulletins. We went, okay, what can we do with the information? How can we visualize it? And what we're looking at here is differences in patterns between males and females in the Cook Islands with regards to mortality. So, and this is age standardized mortality for the epidemiologists in the space, and it enables us to look at the time trends over time and the differences in the mortality rates over time and how much worse things are for males than females. And the broad lines are the confidence intervals, which is a statistical approach for going, okay, how much statistical error is there in this calculation? And so what you can see from this is it's pretty consistent pattern, although a little bit of time variation over time, that men are much more likely to die than women in the Cook Islands. Now, this would be the start of an inquiry where we'd look at the data in a bit more depth and go, okay, what's causing these differences? And then if you look at what's causing those differences, you know, when do those differences kick in terms of the life course? So this is an example using locally sourced Cook Island data from one of the sources that I mentioned before. Here's one using the integrated data infrastructure, and this is part of the stomach cancer project that I've been working on for, it was a 3-year project. I think we're 6 years into a 3-year project, which quite often happens with quantitative research. And this is on stomach cancer. And one of the reasons we're looking at stomach cancer in Pacific peoples is some of you might have heard about Stan Walker's whānau or Ano, and the stomach cancer issue that they have. Well, their whānau started a stomach cancer project to identify the gene, working with Parry Guilford. They found the gene, and it now looks that that gene is old. Right? That gene causes a very nasty form of stomach cancer that spreads really rapidly and is resistant to standard treatments. And because it's old, we're pretty sure it's in the Pacific, right? Because and so we went, okay, let's look at the data from Pacific population in New Zealand to see if we can find it. So we were able to do Cook Island specific analysis on New Zealand data and find some interesting trends with regards to cancer. Now, the method that we've created here can then be used to look at other outcomes, and including more positive ones. But it is possible to do this with Cook Island data in New Zealand. What about if you want to do this and where's some free and useful stuff? Well, university training is expensive, and actually it's quite hard to get training in quantitative social research methods and quantitative health research methods. You actually have to end up at the postgraduate level, and I'm afraid to say that even those training opportunities in universities in New Zealand are declining rapidly, even in Auckland University. So I actually recommend that people now start on online courses, and there's some really, really good free ones. There's Coursera courses, and there's edX courses, just for examples, free, online, and you'll learn lots in terms of both quantitative research methods and statistics. In terms of data tools, I'm going to give a blatant plug for a piece of free software that my little company is involved with. It's developed out of collaboration between Statistics New Zealand, the Education Department, and the Stats Department at Auckland University. What it is a point-and-click data visualizer and analyzer that's designed for high school kids. And it's as part of the curriculum. And what it's got running under the hood is some statistical software called R, which was developed by one of the two developers is a guy called Ross Ihaka, who actually grew up in Avarua before he moved back to New Zealand. He's a Kahungunu boy, but his dad was a teacher at the college. So that's a free analyzer. It is used globally. It's used in Australia, Australian Bureau of Statistics, used in the United States. It's used to teach statistics from year 9 to postgraduate. And it's all free and will remain free. And in terms of advanced software, this is the R statistical software. It's originated in New Zealand. This is seriously global. And it's also, there are free courses like this one at University of Canterbury where you can learn to use this. So there are free training resources available. You don't need to go to university to learn how to do this. And I would say at the moment, some of the university courses are actually declining in terms of their accessibility because they're so few in number. So here's an example of the R statistical software. Of the Insight software. It's a visualizer first. This sits on your own machine. You're not giving your data to anybody. You're not putting your data on a Google Drive. This is a data sovereign tool. So it is entirely based on your own machine. You load this onto your machine, and then you load your data into it, and you just go exploring. And it's all free and will remain free. And just follow that link down the bottom. What are some of the other future opportunities coming through? And I've got to do a shout out to the Pacific Data Sovereignty Group. Data sovereignty for the Pacific is really, really important. If you think that people are after your natural resources, you're right. If you think they're after your data resources, you are right. Right? One of the things that's happening in the AI environments now is that data is it isn't just the new oil, it's the new land. Right? Oil kind of gets used, and then land gets taken, and other people extract value out of it, right? And once it's gone, right, it's very hard to get back. And if you do get it back, somebody's played with it, right? And it may not be the same. Data sovereignty is one of the key fundamental issues facing the Pacific as people come in and are looking to exploit natural resources and the data that goes with it, including the data about people. That's especially important about health, because one of the things about some of the health conditions that Polynesian peoples, including Māori, face are really important globally, but in some of our characteristics makes us very important to study, he says in inverted commas. So the data sovereignty movement is really important. Now they have data sovereignty expertise, data tech expertise, global alliances, and they've formed an alliance with the Te Marae Ora, the Māori data sovereignty movement that I helped found many years ago, to now start doing a global research partnership about data sovereignty with the Sami people, with Canadian, United States, Mexican, and South American Indigenous peoples doing Indigenous data sovereignty. The other big resource, of course, is the Pacific Data Hub, and that's a source of information dashboard, so you don't have to do the analysis. It's already done for you. Data tools as well as data. The Pacific community is doing some fantastic work in their data for development with regards to developing standard methods for data processing, data storage. Insight Analytics, our team is going to be working with them because we're creating freeware ways of storing data in data sovereign environments and still making it accessible. And the one thing I really want to mention on the way out is that Horizon Europe funding is also available. And I'm one of the national contact points for Horizon Europe. This is the largest global research fund on the planet. It is currently worth about 95 billion euros, and over 7 years, and the next iteration is going to be worth 165 billion euros. Cook Islands can be involved in this. It takes a little bit of negotiation, but definitely the other agencies and NGOs can be involved as well. So there are future data system changes, the challenge of AI, the challenge of AI data harvesting, the challenge of people just data harvesting generally means we need to start thinking about rebuilding our data systems and our analytic approaches. But there are some things happening that we can join up, collaborate, and learn from others. So that's a whirlwind tour of quantitative research relevant to the Cook Islands and some of the future challenges that are coming up and some of the potential solution pathways. So I'll leave it there and stop sharing my screen.
Kia ora, and thanks very much, Andrew. Me taki maata. That was fantastic. And I think we've all picked up some gems from that, and especially the freebies, but even the opportunities to seek research funding outside the country. So we'll move on to our last speaker, and this is Dr. Polly Atatoa, an Associate Professor of Population Health at the Institute for Population Research at the University of Waikato, and she's also a public health physician in child and youth health at Health New Zealand, Waikato. I like to say that I like to know her as the mother of some beautiful Mangaian children, who are doing some fantastic work. One of her daughters already involved in research with Ministry of Marine in the Cooks. So, and her husband is the famous Robbie Atatoa, if I may put a plug in. But over to you, Polly.
Oh, kia ora nga tātou katoa, mai taki mata. Can you see that? All good? Te tuku aroa ki te au aka aere o te wānanga, kia ora te tua o te Evangelia, te tua o te kawamani, e te tua o te inua. Tangi ke kua wātou o ki tātou. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today to you all. Like Andrew, it's a little daunting to see some of the participants online, and like Emma, I am really just touching on some fundamental basics around research ethics with the view to future wānanga around more in-depth Cook Islands research ethics processes and protocols, and also connecting to Andrew's discussion of data sovereignty. I'm a member of the Pacific Data Sovereignty Network, and it's a real privilege to work with those members, other members, as well as many of you on this wānanga that I've had the privilege of hanging out with in the Cook Islands, and also perhaps doing a little bit of anganga along the way. So really just the basic fundamentals of research ethics is thinking about the concepts of right and wrong, benefit and harm, and how we can translate key fundamental ethical principles into actions and processes that make sure that our research is able to meet the amazing outcomes that we've heard from Emma and Andrew today. And really, in a similar timeframe to the timeframe that Dr. Aumea presented at the beginning of this discussion, we've had some real advances in health research and in research ethical guidance in general, particularly following some devastating experimentation on humans by the Nazis and by others that have led to really an opportunity to develop internationally recognised codes and guidelines and legislation around research ethics. And typically, these codes and guidelines and statements around research ethics, they provide a set of universal ethical principles that are applied. They typically include the kind of principles that you see here. Respect for autonomy, so making sure that participants in research have choice and control over their participation and power to make decisions, and that decision making to participate in research is informed and under free will, and that can be withdrawn. That the research is really focused on doing good, maximising benefit or beneficence from the research to be undertaken. That harms, risk and harms are identified and mitigated. So the principle of non-maleficence. And then there's a lot of complex and really important principles around the kind of area of justice and fairness. And I think these actually become super important when we think about research in the Cook Islands, particularly if we look at some of the background information that we heard from Emma and from Aumea, and the impact of Western colonial research paradigms on Cook Islands research. So we see these principles in many of the codes and guidance and acts here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, but we also see them in the work of the Office of the Prime Minister and other excellent organisations in the Cook Islands that Emma was discussing, and they are recognised in the 2022 update of the Cook Islands Research Ethics Guiding Principles. So that's great. We have these universal principles. They are very important. They do offer protection for research participants and indeed for researchers, because it's enormously dangerous to be undertaking unethical research as a researcher, or to be risking unethical research as a researcher. The way that these are applied in research is through some of those processes that I just mentioned. So research must be approved by an ethical approval committee, and there is this committee in the Cook Islands, as Aumea and Emma mentioned. Researchers must ensure that they have informed consent, so a participant information sheet is always mandatory for seeking ethical approval. As I said, in that information sheet and in the consent forms associated, there has to be an opportunity to withdraw your consent from the research. And if that is not possible, then that has to be explained. There's really important considerations in all ethical approval processes around protecting confidentiality and privacy of research participants, and protecting particularly vulnerable populations, which are usually defined in all sorts of ways, depending on the committee and the context of the research involved. The principles of beneficence and non-maleficence are always explored in an ethics approval document, and there needs to be clear opportunities to minimise the risk of harm, including the risk of harm to anonymity. So typically a privacy impact statement or mechanism of thinking through the risks of privacy. And we see that in qualitative research, for example, if that includes quotes, or I'm currently working with a PhD student, Cook Islands PhD student here, gathering quotes from our mapu, and just thinking through making sure that even though they might be talking about the depth of their identity to their inua, how deep do we go in exploring and presenting that inua with a small participant cohort without those of us in or connected to Cook Islands community being able to identify those young people and making sure that that abides with our ethics approval, and also with good practice, which is basically what ethics is all about. And then in Andrew's discussion around quantitative data, what we typically see are suppression rules. So as Andrew was discussing the size of the Cook Islands population, and then if you look within that at sub-cohorts, perhaps by age, perhaps by geographic location, perhaps by a specific diagnosis, you often get to quite small numbers. So when you're presenting those tables, then you would typically have a suppression rule so that a small number is not presented as the actual number, just to reduce the risk of identification. So all of those kind of really important ethical rules are really important for Cook Islands research and for us as Cook Islands us as researchers interested in Cook Islands research to make sure that we abide by. And then there's this interesting and increasing focus on the data storage, data control, data access components of research ethics, which encompasses some of the data sovereignty work that Andrew was talking about. And as I said, I don't have time to go into that in an enormous amount of detail, but there is an increasing requirement to have a data management plan in our ethical approval processes, and that's really important when we acknowledge the risk of data as the new land, as Andrew said, and particularly not wanting to repeat the colonial damage of research done on Cook Islands and on Indigenous people rather than with and for. And recognising that data can be used for a long time. So your ethics process needs to try and predict that future risk, future use, and the potential risks of that. And as I said, ethics committees have been developed in order to monitor these really important aspects that are derived from those universal principles. But really, when we think about Cook Islands research, those universal principles aren't really enough, because we also have, in addition to that universal approach, we also have some really important considerations from Cook Islands, and indeed more broadly from an Indigenous research ethics perspective. Some of those stem from the collective voice and the collective benefit and the collective principles that apply particularly in Indigenous communities like the Cook Islands. So having ethics approaches that are specified for individual participants sometimes just doesn't really get to that nub of collective benefit and collective ethics. The universal principles, unless you really dig into that justice and fairness aspect, they often also don't get to the nub of Indigenous rights, rights to self-determination, right to sovereignty, right to have decision-making authority and governance over these processes, and the right for Indigenous and indeed Cook Islands people to be able to realise and maximise the benefit from research activities. And we've heard from Emma how fantastic it is over the last 10 to 15 years with this advance of Cook Islands researchers advancing Cook Islands development. And that's fantastic, but it hasn't always been that way, and it is still not always that way. So really having these principles such as collectivism, recognising the diverse data of the Cook Islands. My husband's Mangayan carving patterns, for example, is data. So how do we have ethical principles and processes around any research on the work that he's doing, identifying tupuna in international museums? So really, there's been, as Andrew said, in this recent really rapid advance in our data sovereignty frameworks, there's also been advances in Indigenous research ethics frameworks and guidance, and these include the work of people on the screen for the Health Research Council here in Aotearoa. And this paper here only went to 2020, so it doesn't have the 2022 Cook Islands document included in it. But this review specifically of ethics guidance basically found these core themes that bring in the more Indigenous principles of respect and reciprocity, participation, spirituality, etc., and how we can then enhance those in our research processes is important when we think about whether this is the right research, which of course is gets to the nub of research ethics. I thought I'd just flash this up. I haven't got time to go through it in any detail, and I'm sure your data sovereignty Vairanga coming up will go into this in more detail. But these are some frameworks that the OCAP framework on the left and the care principles, or the fair and care principles of the Global Indigenous Data Alliance, which really start to think through these issues of control, collective benefit, not just a benefit to an individual researcher, access, and thinking through the Indigenous rights to all stages in what is listed here as the data life cycle or the data ecosystem. But obviously, as Andrew presented and as Emma has discussed, that data can be very diverse, and that data ecosystem includes all the kind of components of research that we think about. Happy to discuss those more with you, with anyone, and also the links are there. So if we think about Cook Islands research ethics specifically, as we've heard, we have the Cook Islands Research Ethics Committee, and we have these guiding principles for research involving human participants in the Cook Islands, but also guidance for natural heritage research and for animal research. And this guidance again aligns with the combination of those really important universal principles, but also thinks about what is the right thing to do in the Cook Islands with respect to making sure that research is of high quality, it is for social, cultural and economic development of the Cook Islands, that it builds Cook Islands research capacity, that research outputs and data access can be retained for use by and for the Cook Islands, and that we can protect and reassure the Cook Islands community of the value of research and the generation of knowledge. And as Emma already said, there's many excellent Cook Islands research frameworks that can guide high quality and ethical research with and by Cook Islands, and this is some of the strands of the Te Vaivai model that Emma already mentioned. That's the beautiful Te Vaivai that's hanging in my bedroom. And just really, again, acknowledge Emma and your work on this special issue in the Pacific Dynamics Journal, which has a whole raft of really excellent work by Jesse Kokawa and by Troy Ruhe and many others who are working in this space. And I really appreciate the opportunity to learn from you all. So what does all this mean? Well, if we think about the path of research, and I was just sort of drawing this up earlier today and trying to figure out whether it makes sense, and you can be my test case, and please don't be shy to tell me it doesn't. But if we think about the path of research, and we want really high quality ethical research in the Cook Islands, maybe some of us are collaborators on the left-hand side of this slide. Maybe some of us are the researchers. Maybe some of us are involved in other parts of this pathway. But as researchers, we really need to be thinking about the whole pathway of research when we're thinking about the ethics of what we're doing. Ethics covers this whole pathway, as does governance and sovereignty, which, as I've hopefully shown you, is deeply and interconnected with research ethics. So if that's a pathway that we're happy with, then what would be best practice when we think about this pathway for Cook Islands research? Well, when we asked this of a number of heads of ministries in the Cook Islands and other researchers and people working with researchers and working in Cook Islands communities and writing Cook Islands strategies, we came up with a few potential bullet points that were really important, and this is also building on the work of other Indigenous research ethics guidelines. So there needs to be questions asked of ourselves as researchers and as people who are asking for collaborators. We need to be asking, are we the ones that came up with this research question? What was the genesis of that? Is this something that is actually thought of? I think, Emma, you said something which I wrote down, but I don't know. Who defined the most important question? Who is troubled by the question? You were talking about questions that you were troubled with. What's in your sandwich? So, you know, who's asking that question? Who is the researcher here? Is it a researcher, international researcher who happens to have got some money to do something and thinks, oh, the Cook Islands would be a good place to do this? Or is this an actual researcher and building Cook Islands research capacity? Do the researchers involved understand the Cook Islands context and some of that really beautiful contextual information that that Dr. Emma and Dr. Aumea provided with us today? So these are some really important ethical questions that we need to be asking. And then similarly with the research question, what evidence is there that this research question actually aligns with Cook Islands goals, aspirations and development? Does this align with the strategic goals and objectives of Cook Islands communities and Cook Islands organisations? Will this foster strengths-based impact? While some of this might but because of the research question, might need to be deficit focused, as Andrew presented the stomach cancer information, obviously a very difficult area to research, and an outcome that we don't wish on any of our families. But at the same time, if we don't study that, then we can't know here are some places that we might need to act. But we also need to be building more strengths-based research. A lot of the research done on existing data is because that data is really only deficit data, is deficit research. So we need to be thinking about, has this research question already been answered? Do we need to duplicate this research question? Or can we look at the next steps, which is the action? What methods are we deciding? Who's describing those? Have we considered Cook Islands research methods led by Cook Islands researchers? How will we keep our participants, our researchers, and the research itself safe through the methods that we've selected? And therefore, what ethical considerations do we need to be having in our consents? And then for the second half of my flowchart, thinking about the interpretation bit, again, hearing Emma talk about akapapaanga, for example, and thinking about how we use this research to make good decisions. I think that was something that Andrew said, and also what standardised processes have been used to get us to where we are. Can we take this data that says Cook Islands ethnicity? Can we be sure that that was very high quality ethnicity data collected, and therefore does indeed represent the Cook Islands community? So we really need to be able to understand the quality of the data that we're collecting, but the quality also of the data that we might be using from a secondary data use. And we need to make sure that we do have Cook Islands experts supporting that interpretation and then valuing their expertise, though that indeed itself is an ethical principle. And then finally, thinking about impact, it's not good enough and not ethical to undertake research in the Cook Islands, then go back to your overseas university and write a journal article, and that's your dissemination. I don't believe that that is ethical. I think we need to make sure that ethical research that we're conducting is benefiting the Cook Islands community, that there is an opportunity for researchers to give back and to make sure that their outcomes and the impact of the outcomes and the meaning of that impact is also situated in the Cook Islands. And then, and then finally, thinking about that governance and sovereignty step, which of course again crosses over the entire research process. Thinking about who is accountable, how will we monitor that accountability? Where is the governance line? And again, how is that valued and supported? And how can we align with those critical Indigenous data sovereignty principles and requirements? So that's it really. Thinking through in an ideal state, we would have Cook Islands governance over our research. We would be researching Cook Islands priorities. The research would be registered, would be reviewed, would be accountable, would engage and be led by leading Cook Islands research and engagement and capacity development. There would be appropriate and effective collaboration and community control, and the outcomes would result in collective benefit and capacity development, as well as the effective monitoring and policy development that we already see. And I'm not saying all this to say that this isn't already happening. I think we've already heard, particularly from Emma, about all of the wonderful research that is happening. But we also have heard from Andrew on the power of data. And we really need to keep our pedal to the metal, or whatever the expression is, keep our eye on the ball with respect to research ethics in the Cook Islands. Because, you know, there are big international global players at stake, and we are small but mighty. So it's a really wonderful opportunity to be raising some of these issues and ideas with you today. Mei taki mata, and just a little plug, because Andrew was allowed his plug. I am based in Te Ngira, the Institute for Population Research at the University of Waikato. And while it is not free, and please feel free to discuss that with me, we are starting a new postgrad cert next year in Indigenous data sovereignty and analytics, led by Professor Tahu Kukutai, who I work with. And it would be really fabulous to have Cook Islands representation in that program, and please do get in touch if you want to know more. Mei taki mata, kia manuia.
Mei taki mata, Polly, for a solid presentation. It's just fantastic, and it's been a rich presentation from the various speakers today, and I hope everyone has enjoyed this. Now, we only have a few minutes, 10 minutes before we close. So just looking out to see if anyone has any question that they might want to pose to any of the three speakers.
I have a question.
Yes, Dr. Nuhi.
It's a question. Thank you for the presentations, Polly, Emma, and is it Andrew? Is he the other one?
Yes.
Yes. I enjoyed your presentations. So and I worked in the Cook Islands for 3 years before returning to New Zealand, and attended a number of workshops in the region as well. One of the things I came away with, and this is to the three of you, was that I felt that research in the region was not being driven by the region. It was being driven from outside of the region, from New Zealand universities in particular, because New Zealand and Australian universities in particular, because they were coming into the region with their set topic, undertaking research. The region also doesn't have research priorities too. And so my question is the Cook Islands doesn't have research priorities. My question then is it ethical for universities in particular, because they're the ones who are sending their students into the region to undertake PhD studies, etc., etc. Is it ethical that the region is indeed driving the agenda, and that includes WHO, SBC, and everything else? That is what I saw when I left the Cook Islands. I also set up the research ethics document to Peggy with Valerie. So, yeah.
Polly, would you like to go first?
Oh, kia ora. So I think that it's impossible to have a blanket response to that. I mean, we have an enormous Cook Islands researcher diaspora, as well as fantastic researchers in the Cook Islands. And really, is it appropriate? The answer to that is when working through some of those other questions that I asked. So is this a Cook Islands priority? Will this contribute to Cook Islands development? What is the methods? How will this give back? What will be the collective benefit? And there is a lot of really fabulous research that has been undertaken and will be undertaken in the Cook Islands, not necessarily by Cook Islands resident researchers, that will indeed advance development in the Cook Islands, but it does need to have that precautionary principle, I guess, attached to it, and also to really be able to be viewed within the context of Cook Islands research and research priorities and research outcomes. So, Emma, you might have something else to add on that, given you're working in this space.
I don't have that much to add, though, Nuhi. I agree. I think it's an important question that we have to ask, particularly when the idea of a national research agenda probably needs a little bit more time and discussion as well. I agree, and I think if I could budget a little bit, I think there are conversations happening to that end around a national research agenda. But as Polly says, and I don't want to give a bit of a cop out as an answer, but I do think it's important that we acknowledge as a people that we can't always frame our questions around national goals, and that we do have such a large diaspora, and therefore we have to be able to consider the ways that, for example, doctoral students are Cook Islanders that are in New Zealand that are also obviously attached to universities and diaspora as well. But I agree. I think the institutional power of universities in New Zealand and Australia can be as influential and sometimes exert power that is not immediately beneficial, I think. I'm putting it very lightly, obviously, in local contexts and grounded contexts in the Pacific. There's definitely issues there for sure. So I think it's a good question that you're asking, and one that I ask often myself.
Andrew, do you have a comment?
The issue of having a nationally driven research agenda is going to become much more important as people start approaching the Cook Islands. We're beginning to see certain countries to the west of the Cook Islands, certain countries to the east, and even Europe coming in and suddenly realizing that there's a lot going on in Wananui, Kiwa. So that's going to be about money, and money's going to require and there's going to be big money in, as Polly said, big players, and they're going to want data. And so having a predetermined research agenda is going to enable you to be the gatekeepers and pick the good actors from the bad actors, and even when the good actors, which are the best good actors in terms of supporting the development of the Cook Islands in the way that the Cook Islands want, in the way that the Cook Islands determine, not the way that other aid agencies or the UN or anything else determine. It's going to become really important really quickly, and it's going to be one of the fundamental parts of maintaining data sovereignty for the Cooks and its peoples.
Thank you. And I suppose just adding, working in both sides, Cooks and New Zealand, I mean, Andrew, you said it at the beginning, it's smallness, we're small. And so there's everyone doing so many different jobs, and we don't always have the time. We have the energy, but not the time available to us to do this. And at the end of the day, if you look at this forum this afternoon, this is a good signal from the Cook Islands that the Cook Islanders in the Cook Islands want this, because I think when the country is committed to this, then we'll move forward. Previously, we've had to come in and supplement that and complement that. And I think now that we've got this growing force in the Cooks, I think we have a better chance at doing something and more sustainable in the future. David, you have a question.
Kia ora na katoa, and thank you, Aumea, for allowing this Tongan to speak in this forum. Wonderful to see you, Polly, and the previous speakers. My question is to Andrew. Andrew, I'm involved in a piece of work, and Aumea knows about this, and so is Sir Colin. And it's called the Polynesian Health Corridor, and I'm involved in the piece around cancer control in the Six Nations in the Polynesian Health Corridor. One of the challenges in that space, Andrew, is around cancer registry. We collect this in the Six Nations, but you're a lot closer to this fish than I do, and I was just seeking your view, and you mentioned the use of R by this brilliant Cook Island Maori fellow in the University of Auckland, and your program in the Insight. But I was just thinking we have a challenge in terms of capacity. We don't have enough of our people. We collect the data, clinicians collect the data in the registry. The challenge is, can we use AI to analyze? We obviously collect the data. Can we have AI utilizing it? And how far is your program, if your software and R could be used by AI or whatever to make this data useful for our countries? That's my question, Andrew, or anybody else that could answer that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think AI is overkill. I think there's some standard tools now and standard approaches that developed over the last couple of years. I've got a young. Everybody's young. I'm feeling old. There's a master student who's working with me who's from Niue and Samoa, who is really good at automating data sets, automating the analysis. So The main thing is that the countries get, how I said quantitative research is about standard processes. If the data counts, right, are delivered in a certain standard format, then that can, with some routine free code, can be automatically processed and produce those graphs like I did with the mortality graph for the Cook Islands. That's possible now. It's possible with free software, and you don't need AI. So it just needs a standardized approach to be able to do it. And I've got meetings with the Pacific Community Data Peeps in early December to start talking about maybe doing some of that work next year. So we've got a standard tool that any country can pick up, panel beat a little bit to suit their own circumstances, put their own data in the standard format, and get the standard output. I think that's the way to go. My primary concern with AI is that at the moment I see a lot of AI tools that are actually in data harvest mode. And so if we don't need to do that, let's not go that far. It might be useful for downstream once we've got all of this stuff collated and we can have a closed system AI. Let's have that conversation once we've got some of the data systems standardized. Really happy to follow up, David, anytime at all.
Thank you.
Yeah, you've made a really good point, and it's important work to be done, and it probably wouldn't take that much work to get it organized. It just needs some time and some money, like everything else.
Thank you. Sir Colin, any comments from you?
Oh, it's just wonderful to listen in to this. As you know, it took a while to get this together, but you've put on a fantastic first session. It's a different conversation, obviously, from some of the other research webinars we've had, but it's just fantastic to see this happening, and clearly a conversation about the next one and the next one. We're just happy to have had a part in facilitating this, but obviously a lot of capability within the Cook Islands research community, and so we're happy to be in the background. At some stage, I think the region would need to have a conversation about sharing this knowledge in some form. It'll be different in different countries, but at some point, you know how some places, we're talking with Niue, for example, they don't have an ethics review process. Fiji is very well developed. What can we do to facilitate the sharing of the expertise within the region? But that's the next step. I just think for today, fantastic, Andrew, Polly, and Emma. Wonderful, and thanks for your superb guidance, Aumea. Fantastic.
Thank you. Well, I suppose no other takers. We should just prepare to close. Now, just wanted to say again, thank you to Te Poutoko Ora a Kiwi Centre for Pacific and Global Health. Thank you so much, Sir Colin and your team, Lisi and Nale. And also thank you to the Cook Islands, Te Marae Ora. This is Dr. Whaideka, Dr. Ni'o, Abigail, Helen, as well as who was the other one? I forgot her name. That's been helping us with this work and pulling it together. It's been a fantastic event today, the first for this year, and we'll be planning for next year as well. Now, one of the things I wanted to sort of highlight was that we sort of overlooked doing an opening prayer because I'd already done my prayers earlier in other meetings. So anyway, if we can close with a prayer, and may I ask Dr. Kirianu Ni'o, if you're still here with us, if you can come online. Oh, there you go. If you can, and he's part of the research committee for the Ministry of Health as well. If you can close us in prayer. And thank you so much to everyone that's here. Thank you to the Cook Islands team as well. Me taki maata, kia orana, kia manuia.
Me taki maata, Dr. Aumea. Thank you for facilitating this fantastic webinar session. And to our esteemed academics who raised their hands to present to us this late afternoon. A huge appreciation to Dr. Emma, Associate Professor Andrew, and Polly. On behalf of the TMO Research Committee, our Secretary of Health and Executive, please note that your presentation is well received from our end. A very special one that, like Dr. Aumea alluded earlier, to Sir Colin and your team there. We appreciate this time for initiating the dialogue between ourselves, and mainly to strengthen the research capacity here in the Cook Islands via this platform, including our diaspora and our Pacific friends and families. So at the way we'll love tatu takato, kapure tatu kite tu, let us pray. Tomato mitu tapu te kamita kine akwe, iro to iti ajang, wata ki topeng, tena te tu te tutu te akakite mai te kariro I meita ki no mato, ki riro te reira mea popinga ki roto I tomato orang. Aka meita ki mai tomato taek, I New Zealand, Australia, te Pacifica kato tomato I te kukiara nine, I roto I te atuata. Bless us, Lord, as we dismiss from this platform. We appreciate your presence, and we pray and ask for your blessings over us until we see each other again in the future. Lord, this is our prayer unto you. In the name of Jesus, we commit all these things. Amen.
Bye, Joe. Bye. Bye,
Bye, Kite.
Dr. Bye, Lisa. Bye, everyone.
Bye, Kara.